The Supreme Court could rule on President Obama's health law any day now. And besides 30 million people or so that may get insurance, there are a whole bunch of other folks, tanning salons, chain restaurants, even breastfeeding advocacy groups that are waiting to hear what's going to happen. We have Janet Adamy joining us in Washington. Good morning, Janet.
Good morning.
How you doing? Thanks so much for joining us. We're great up here. So tell us a little bit about the other constituencies here that are paying close attention to the healthcare law. You talk about tanning salons, for instance, chain restaurants, and breastfeeding advocacy groups.
Sure. Well, when most people think of this law, they think about the core purpose of it, which is to expand insurance to millions more Americans. But it's a big law, and there are actually a number of other provisions that have little or nothing to do with health insurance. You mentioned the chain restaurants. One of the pieces of the law that has yet to take effect is it's going to require restaurants with more than 20 locations to list the calorie counts for items on their menus and menu boards. For tanning salons, there was a 10% tax on tanning services that took effect 2 summers ago. There's also something that's gotten very little attention that breastfeeding advocates have been paying a lot of attention to. There's a provision in the law that requires employers to provide break time and a private space for working women who are breastfeeding. So there's a bunch of things in the law that really have not gotten, as much attention, but you have a group of advocates who are very far outside insurance companies and hospitals who are very anxiously awaiting this decision because it has big implications for them.
Janet, tell us about Leanne O'Connor, who you write about in your story.
Yeah, she's a lactation consultant in New York City, and she was saying, if that provision in the law went away, their concern is that the laws shape the culture, and that for those people who are advocating for better conditions for breastfeeding, that if you didn't have this law in place, women wouldn't have the same kind of support of the force of the law to assert their rights to be able to get the kind of accommodations they need to breastfeed. So she also is a member of a group called La Leche League, and they're very concerned that this provision could go away if the Supreme Court decides to strike down the entire law.
Meanwhile, with the chain restaurants you mentioned, it's not just chain restaurants. You also have supermarkets. So, for instance, if I wanted to go to Whole Foods, and you've got those, basically the hot bar, where you've got all those, they would have to list the calories for literally every prepared dish that they have out there?
Well, in talking to the Food Marketing Institute here in Washington, they represent grocery retailers, and what they're saying is, the way that the initial regulation was written is it wouldn't just apply to restaurants, it would apply to them too, the kinds of things they sell in their deli. So they're saying for a number of stores, yes, things that are put out on a bar or in the deli, they would have to label those, and they say that what's tricky about that is that, you don't know exactly what the portion size is going to be. There's a lot of different combinations. There are regional changes to items that would make it difficult to do that kind of labeling. So they are one of the groups that have started trying to mobilize to lay the groundwork if the court were to strike down the law and there was replacement legislation. They're trying to make sure that they wouldn't get included in any type of replacement legislation.
Now, of course, one of the big impacts would be the number of folks who have received coverage as a result of President Obama's law that might lose coverage. And you mentioned in your story, of course, I think one of the most popular ones is that kids up to 26 can still be covered under their parents' plans. That's proved very popular. You also mentioned that there are folks enrolled in Medicare who are under 65 as a result of being exposed to environmental hazards.
Yeah, there's a very little-known provision in the law that allowed a group of folks in Libby, Montana, who there was a mine there that threw off some asbestos. It's been shut down for a while now, but there are many residents there who've suffered from the effects of this asbestos, and there was a provision that got tucked into the law that allowed them to get on Medicare before they turned 65. And so a number of people there, hundreds of people there, have signed up for that. I spoke with the mayor, and he was telling me they just really don't know what would happen if the entire law were struck down. That statute wouldn't be in place that entitled to them that entitled them to that Medicare. So they're trying to figure out whether it would mean that right away their Medicare benefits would go away, or over time whether they might lose that coverage, or if there's any way they could try to stay on the program. And it's true, there are a number of provisions that have been in effect already, things like staying on your parents' plan until age 26, or no copays for preventive service. Some insurance companies have come out and said they'll keep those provisions in place one way or the other, no matter what the Supreme Court rules. But again, if there's not a law in place requiring companies to do that, there's a lot less likelihood that those things will be in place across the board for all Americans, and that they would stay in place over the long term.